rather than more like everyone else. So, having said that, the way that we're going to structure our session for today is uh, the panelists and I have sort of spoken amongst ourselves, and we've come up with some questions that we're going to talk about. And I'll ask each of the questions, and the panelists will have a chance to provide their input. But we'd also like to have all of you, because we're all here as equals, uh, contribute as well. So after the panelists have had a chance to say some things, we'll invite your input either through typing into the chat window, and then Jinwin or Grant will read out your question. Or if you prefer, you'll be able to ask your question directly and or provide your input if you've got something that's relevant to the question. You can please do share with the rest of us, and that's kind of how we'll sort of go through the questions that we have, and I'll keep those as a surprise until they come up, and then there might be some time for more general discussion at the end as well. So, but first of all, what I'd like to ask, actually, this is my first question, which is question number 0, is I'd like to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about how you came to be here and what your interest in um, in this topic is, and your background and whatever you'd like to say. So whoever would like to go first, leap in. Ariel's mic is unmuted, so I'm going to say you're first.
Hey. Hi, everyone. So great to be on this panel and to be talking with people in Burnaby. I'm a Burnaby native. I grew up here in South Burnaby, not North Burnaby. And I'm back living in South Burnaby after having lived in a lot of places in the world. I'm a teacher in the public school system. I don't teach in Burnaby, I teach in Vancouver, but I have 2 teenage boys who are in Burnaby at a Burnaby school. So I feel quite connected to all kinds of systems in place for education right now. I'm a ceramic artist at heart, but I do teach a whole bunch of different disciplines in the arts, as all and most art teachers have to do in their schools at the high school level and at the elementary level if they're lucky enough. So ceramics and media arts and drawing and painting and yearbook and media arts and everything you can think of, really. And how I came to this panel was through my good friend Grant and Grant's lovely wife Michelle, who I've known my entire life, and just literally my entire life. And it just seemed like a really great opportunity to connect and to talk about something that's really important to me and to hopefully everyone here, and hopefully spark some interest in how to make art not just celebrated, but to make art an empowering experience for everyone who participates, and to increase that participation in our lives and in our world, and not just with kids, but with everyone. So I'm really excited about the conversations that are going to happen. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Ariel. Winnie or Rebecca, would either of you like to offer to go next?
Sure, I can go next.
Sure.
Oh, my dog has decided to join me here on the couch. Thanks so much, Dawn, and thank you to Junwen and Grant for organizing this incredible community arts festival. So amazing to just always like realize how many artists are among us, and really grateful for all that you contribute to the community, those of you who are artists. My name is Winnie Tam, and I am a community member here in Burnaby. I am a parent of 2 teenagers. They both go to secondary school in North Burnaby. And I'm probably the one person on the panel that doesn't quite fit in. I'm not a practicing artist. I have a background as a teacher, and I've worked in arts administration and arts programming for over 20 years. Some of you know me from a visual and performing arts center for children and youth in Burnaby Heights that I ran and owned for 7 years called Art Space, and have been very privileged to work with some of you that are here on this call tonight in that space. And my current role is interim executive director of Art Starts in Schools, an organization some of you also might be familiar with. Art Starts provides innovative arts programming for young people across the province. And we also support teachers and artists with practical learning resources to integrate arts into learning. And we are also an organization that provides leadership and advocacy for arts and education. So I come to this panel because of that experience, but also a personal connection to Grant and Junwen, who I have the privilege of calling friend, neighbor, and community member. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca Heyl. I also want to thank Junwen and Grant for organizing this and the festival, and also the Burnaby North Neighborhood House for doing so much for this, and Dawn for moderating. So I want to be a little brief because I'm hoping we're going to jump into conversation. Is everything okay? Is it with my mic, you think? No. Okay, I'll continue. It must have been some feedback. So I have, so presently, I'll start with the present because that's where I know where I am, and then we can maybe go back and forth. But right now, for the last 4 years, I've been working as an artist in residence in schools, public schools in Vancouver, through a program called AIRS, which is Artist in Residence Studio Program. And what we do is we set up art studios in schools that have extra classrooms, and we create a space that remains in the school in which programs can be run. We're usually there 1 day a week, and the other days teachers are able to use that space. So we're somehow kind of and this is in elementary schools. So you may or may not know, but in most elementary schools in this area, I don't want to say all of British Columbia, art isn't taught by an art specialist. It's another job that's put on the shoulders of teachers. And I guess our program was started because we felt that there was a really big gap. I didn't start the program, but I've been in it for a while, and I really love it, because we really get to, part of our job is to work with teachers and to figure out ways that our art projects can coincide with the curriculum that's being done in classrooms, and how we can enact different ways of knowing and artistic ways and material engagement that may also kind of go into the curricular elements that are happening in the classroom. So there's like a spillover effect. Oh, someone's coming in that I know.
Just as you were talking
I
about
know. Hi, Maggie. So Maggie is actually the founder, the co-founder of the AIRS program, and it's exciting that she's here. And Tammy's here in Junwen, so they also know a lot about it. But so I've been doing that for the past 4 years, and it's given me a really great eye into the school, and also, what's possible. And yeah, I think we're in about 15 schools right now in the Vancouver area. So hi, Maggie. But I come to this role with a background in photography and photojournalism. So a lot of the work I do with kids now is also, we don't actually do any photography, but it is captured, the work is captured in what we call pedagogical documentation or learning stories that then we can share with ourselves in the classroom, with the teachers, with the parents, with a broader community to kind of see all the ways that the learning can go. So that's how my art background, that's part of how my art background goes into my role right now, the photography. So I believe in kind of using photography as a way to make visible and to make known ideas and children's thinking, is yeah, we can talk more about that later. I could go on forever. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here and see where this conversation goes. So thank you.
Fantastic, Rebecca. And thank you for what you said, because that kind of leads right into our first question. Thank you to Ariel and Winnie as well. When we talked earlier, a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that we talked about is how often in our schools, art is seen as something that's nice to have, but perhaps not as essential as some of the core subjects, the academic subjects like reading, writing, science, math, and things like that. Well, yes. So one of the things that we want to really talk about today, and as Rebecca mentioned, a lot of the elementary schools at least don't even have an art specialist teacher. Art is taught by classroom teachers who often, and I have a friend who teaches elementary school teachers uh, art subjects. She says many of them come into her classroom absolutely terrified at the idea of teaching art. So if you're starting with somebody who's scared of the art process and that person is expected to teach art and teach it as a joyful subject, that would be a very hard task. So things like the AIRS program are really important. But our first question that we'd like to talk about today is, or to address, is how is art integral to those academic subjects, and how does art play a role in learning about those academic types of things? And whoever would like to get started, you can just unmute your mic and I'll call on you. Winnie.
As the non-artist, if I can kick us off. I think especially as a non-artist, but as a former educator, this is a really great question, and I will leave it to those of you who do teach arts to talk more about the practicalities. But I think what's really helped me is to shift the thinking from like art and the product of art, of artistic practice, to the creative process. And so when speaking and working with educators who don't have an arts background, I think framing the practice of creativity might make things less intimidating. And so, some of the work that we do at Art Starts is to provide educators with tools for integrating more creative practice into their teaching. Because I think then it's less about product and much more about the journey of being creative, and the really important skills that come out of that, like the mistake making, problem solving, collaboration, and this divergent thinking. Those are all part of creative process and creative practice, and of course definitely leading to a rich product. I was reading today about how rich process leads to rich product. And so part of that too is like partnering, just like, AIRS is a wonderful example. Art Starts does this as well, is to allow artists to work in collaboration with teachers in schools. I think that that also empowers, you know, teachers to be able to integrate more artistic experiences within their teaching. So
I'd love
Rebecca?
to tag on to that.
Yeah.
This idea of creative, you said practice of creativity. That sounds wonderful, actually, because it brings up the idea of practice, that this is something that we continue. It's not a one-off. It's not a, oh, we're going to make something and then we're done. So I think the word practice is always really wonderful, because we send I have a teenage son. He goes to soccer practice. You know, we spend time on certain other things, and they take a lot of practice, but it doesn't seem that the arts ever gets that same kind of recognition in the same way, as that it's a practice and it takes time to work with it. And I agree, we talked about this last time, but the art, like, I feel like the word art is often misconstrued, or the idea of a capital A, and it kind of scares people, art with a capital A, and it kind of scares people off. But if you said, or even if they think of galleries and they think of kind of a commodity and a product, you know, I think it goes right to the idea of we're making products. And if it's about creativity, it's so much more about the process. And yeah, I do find that teachers, a lot of them are really, when I work with them, they're really, oh, I do that art so bad, I don't know how to do it. And then when in our program, when the teachers are part of our art studios, they're there to basically it's part of their professional development, and also to enjoy and to see that, you know, art can be a real joyous moment, and that different things can come out in different students that maybe in their own classroom, the teacher hasn't always seen that side of a student. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Ariel?
Yeah,
Chime in?
those are beautiful ideas and sentiments, and I really appreciate. I've benefited personally, and my classes and my school has, from AIRS and Art Starts. I've collaborated with both of those programs in the past, and as someone who is inheriting elementary school age students into my high school art programs, I can attest to the fact that art doesn't seem to be a priority in terms of developing visual literacy in elementary age students in the same way that perhaps numeracy and literacy are. But I'm going to just say that in terms of how does it help and enhance other subjects, I think that when students engage in art, what it gives them is the skills and tools and processes to express themselves and to kind of center themselves and express themselves through their own individual lens of who they are. And in doing so, gives them a place to respond to other things with. So I think that I collaborate whenever I can with other teachers. And for an example is, I just spoke with the teacher who's going to be teaching all the grade 8s in the 4th quarter this year. I have the grade 8s coming up this week. And I said, what are the concepts that you're going to be teaching in Math 8? What can, how can I front load them, like tessellations, geometry, scale, working in scale? How can we do that so that when they reach you in the next quarter, and this year is a very odd year for rolling out curriculum, I have to admit, but it's given me a chance always to just build vocabulary that's really meaningful for kids. And they experience it first with, kids love making and building and working with their hands and creating stuff. And if you can contextualize that for them and launch that idea into other realms, it's really, really powerful. And I always talk about the triangle of knowledge. In our system, it seems like we separate everything out into these little compartmentalized subjects. And the more knowledge you gain, the more you realize that up at the top here, it's all one thing. It's all this beautiful, connection to all kinds of um, uh, ideas about scale and size and proportion and you know what it just means to be alive in the living world, and it all boils down, in my mind, and I might be biased, but it all boils down to this learning about expressing yourself the best way you can in order to have these ideas known. And so as an art teacher, ideas are the biggest thing that I try and work with, and everything else just kind of falls in a tumbling array behind us. So it's really fun being an art teacher. I really love it.
Mhm.
And I really just love it when kids connect with it. And I wish that it was a graduation requirement for all kids leaving high school to take art through every grade, so they can have that experience and have that knowledge of the interconnectedness, and how visual arts and dramatic arts and music and film, and you know, how it can offer these things. Yeah, beautiful.
Thanks, Ariel. And I'm going to take off my moderator hat for a moment and give my own example. So I'm primarily a textile artist, and fairly recently I was working with a group of a couple of groups of grade 3, 4 students on a weaving project. And one of the things that I did was I was showing them how to make pom-poms. And the way you make pom-poms is you wrap wool around a small piece of cardboard, and there's a hole in the middle. And as we were doing that, the hole started to fill up. And I said, well, you know, why do you think that the holes get in the middle of this thing is getting smaller? And then we had a discussion about mass and how mass takes up space. And the more yarn you put on there, the more space it's taking up, and that's science. And then at the end, you cut all those little pieces of thread, but they don't instantly slip out of that little hole. Why is that? It's something called friction, more science, right? And those are practical things, and they're questions that kids do have. And it was a kind of a nice way to introduce some science into an art lesson, and some art into perhaps a science lesson. We also talked about things like, oh, this is taking a really long time if you're just wrapping one piece of yarn around and around and around. What happens if you wrap two pieces around at the same time, or 4 or 8? That makes it much faster. You can introduce math that way. And, you know, it's a different learning than sitting and adding 1 plus 1 or multiplying. And as a weaver, there's all kinds of math involved. And when I teach adults and I say, well, you're going to have to calculate how many, if you know, if there are 10 threads per inch and you want something that's 5 inches wide, you have to figure out how many threads that is. And I get these deer cotton headlight looks from adults. And I mean, it's not complicated math, but you know, that could be a way that kids learn math that has some practical applications, and just the dry numbers that are just swimming around in their head. And another example that came up, which is not math and science related, in case you didn't know, I have a science degree, so I think about science all the time. No, I don't. I think about art all the time, but science pops up. While we were doing the weaving, one little boy puts up his hand and he said, do they do weaving in Peru? And it was just completely out of the blue. And I think, yes, they do. Lots of weaving in Peru. And he was just interested in flags, but I was really happy that we were able to then, and just very coincidentally, I just come back from Peru on a weaving trip. So we were able to bring that into the conversation as well, and sort of include something that he was really interested in, and sort of make those connections. So I think that, you know, those are just some really concrete examples from one project that I've done, but those things come up all the time. And I'm sure that you all have examples of ways that you incorporate other learning, even language learning, into art projects. So I think now that we've all had our say, including me, we can open it up. And I know I saw some comments that came up in the chat. Somebody had mentioned a book that sounded really interesting. There were a couple of other things. So if Jinwen, if you'd perhaps like to read out the comments, and if anybody would like to say anything, there's the little hand up icon, or you can just put your hand up physically, and then we can call on you and you can have your say and provide your feedback as well.
Yeah, so we just have a comment here from Tammy that says that art is a whole brain exercise and it's connected to everything. And Jesus says that recommended the book, The Live Wired. He thinks it's a perfect complement to this conversation. And then our Grant is asking, art through every grade? Yes, please. Grant, you're just talking to the choir here.
I know.
You know, like, anyways, and I see that Kathy has her hand up. So Kathy, you can unmute your mic. Yes.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Hold on. I'm going to try something. Hang on. It's better?
Yes, yes.
It is, eh? I had a Bluetooth speaker that I unplugged. Just a sec.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Oh no, I think she completely left the meeting.
She unplugged something
Okay.
else. Hopefully she'll be back.
She'll be back. Hopefully she'll be back.
Yeah.
Yeah, Grant has a question. Should we let Grant talk because he's gonna talk for a long time?
I promise it's a question. It's a question.
Okay, Grant, go ahead.
Historically, because it's been mentioned already that art is not taught by an art specialist currently in most BC schools. When did that happen?
Maggie has her hand
Maggie
up.
has an answer. Should we let Maggie talk because she can also talk for a long time? Okay. Go, Maggie. You have to unmute. Oh. She has some speaker. Oh, there you go.
Hi, sorry. I have children making a lot of very loud noise, so I just wanted to close the door so you didn't hear that as well. Hi, everyone. Sorry that I came late. There was a lot of contingencies that occurred tonight that were unexpected. But very happy to be here, and I love everything that people have shared. I have done a considerable amount of research and advocacy with the provincial government, actually. I repeatedly bang my head against the wall with the Select Standing Committee every year about arts education. And we get into the recommendations, but of course, you know that recommendations don't actually mean real money. But what has happened is there have been several policy decisions that have impacted funding at a provincial level, which is discouraging, but also encouraging in the way in which it's actually decisions that have impacted the art, which is there always the hope that decisions can be, that can change. So it was actually under the NDP government in the 90s that there was a change in the way in which funding was delivered. And so there was a huge loss of jobs. Specialization at the elementary school went into a prep time model. And in Vancouver, so in some districts, the districts will choose what that prep is. Like Burnaby, I think music is a designated prep. In other districts like Vancouver, the teachers decide what they want as prep. So it could be like library and PE. And so those were the only specializations that were allotted. And for elementary school, it's about 2 40-minute periods in a week. And so art specialists at that time gradually were replaced and never rehired. And then at the university level, because of the loss of, so specialization as a designation for elementary teaching also disappeared at that point. And the union developed an understanding that a teacher is a teacher at an elementary level. So every elementary teacher is competent to teach every subject within elementary school. Hence, there is no need for specialists per se. And so partly, I think that that was a move to protect teacher jobs. So teachers that had been teaching for many years wouldn't be ousted by a new specialist teacher coming in. But it has remained throughout. So you see a sort of gradual decline of art specialists in the school. So I know that in Vancouver, for example, there were in the early 90s about 200 art specialists that taught in elementary schools, either as designated art specialists or as elementary teachers that would platoon. And that is now one. There is one art specialist in elementary schools in Vancouver, and that's for the Fine Arts Choice program at Nootka. So that's a huge shift. The other thing that happened at that same time is that in university with the PDP programs, they no longer were training elementary art specialists. And that in part had to do with the reduction of teaching degrees that got shorter and shorter and shorter. So the PDP went from, I mean, you can still get an education degree that's like a 4-year degree, but it went from a 2-year program, for example, at UBC to a 1-year program. And so you could no longer specialize as an art elementary teacher. You were a generalist teacher and you could specialize in art, but a generalist teacher will have 6 weeks of a 6-week course of visual arts instruction. And so that is the only instruction there. So at the same time, and Ariel pointed to this as well in her in what she was saying, the graduation requirements have changed. And that was the Liberal government in 2004. And so instead of students taking both art and an applied art in grade 10, and then again in grade 11 and 12, they now have, they are now only required to take one of either fine or applied art in grade 10 to 12. So that is a 75% reduction in arts-based course requirements. And now technology is also included in the applied arts. So a child could go through elementary school and high school with a I don't know, is it 10-week rotation in grade 8? Which, if you think about art as a literacy and as a way of knowing and seeing the world, that is not a sufficient amount of time in which to really nurture and grow that capacity. And I think that's what it is, really. We are missing out on a human capacity and nurturing that, which is critical to our social well-being as a society.
Thanks, Maggie. And I think that Kathy is back now, and we'll get back to her question now too. Kathy.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. So I was connected to a Bluetooth speaker, and as soon as I disconnected it, everything went haywire. Oh my goodness. I just want to thank you for being there tonight and for being in the neighborhood and just being there in the world. And I just want, if we're still on the question of how important art is to a student, that's still the question, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, I'd like to share what it was like for me as a student having my art class. Okay.
Yeah.
So I started drawing as a kid. I would be at the kitchen table and I'd draw the cartoons. I would draw Dennis the Menace, and I just loved drawing. And when I got to high school, I was a very lonely kid. I was a loner. I didn't know how to mix in, and except in art class. And I had two art teachers, and they were both Ukrainian. And I say that because they brought that flavor to it. And they were very stern and strict, but they and they had white coats, long white, like medical coats, but they were fabulous. And that place, that was my happy place. And it's so much so that on my lunch hour, I didn't mingle with kids because I didn't know how to do that. I went in and hid with the art teacher, and he would share his lunch with me, and I would learn even more about art, right? And and then in university, I was making choices about what I would do, and I did a major in political science, but I did a minor in fine arts. And what everybody was saying tonight is so very true. It's such an outlet to express oneself, one's soul, and your brain and your body and everything does things differently. It's just different. It's a space that you fill with you, and it expands everything, your mind, your feelings, your soul. So, and I remember my art teacher in university saying to me, so I thought I would go to law school. And she said, what a loss. Do the art, because I loved it. But anyways, that also helped me make choices in life. There's the art, there's the law, like, you have, right? The sciences and all that, they're all geared in a different way. So thanks for letting me share, and thank you. Just thank you.
And you know what? Thank you for sharing that, because that perfectly leads into my next question, which is, and this is something that we've talked about a lot, and it's come up in the discussion that we've had so far around how things aren't in silos. Like, there isn't math by itself and English by itself and art by itself, that everything is everything. It's all related to each other. And, you know, that sort of integrated approach to learning and problem solving is so important in the world that we live in today. And that's what we want to talk about next, is how can art be used to address some of those big ideas, whether they're social ideas, environmental ideas, ideas around diversity, finding places for people who don't feel like they fit in other places, that give them an opportunity to express themselves. How does art do that? And I think that what you just said is exactly speaking to that. So I don't know, do you think that our panelists can follow up that passionate example that Kathy just gave us? Anyway, you guys can try. Who wants to bravely march in there and go first this time?
Oh gosh.
Rebecca.
Hi. I actually have a visual that I thought we'd probably get to at some point, but this might be a good way to break into it. It's talking about studio habits of mind, and that when we work in the studio, we're not just working on I don't know, a piece, but we're encountering so many things on the way that are easily transferable to how we deal with anything in our life. So I'll bring it up as it's just a little visual. I didn't make it. I located it on the internet, but I think it's something, especially if you want to talk to people that maybe don't value the arts in the same way. It's one way to kind of start a conversation about these habits of mind. So the idea of to stretch and explore. I mean, inquiry-based learning works so well with the arts, and now we have that new curriculum. It's just the perfect opportunity that the arts can go into everything. As Kathy, I believe, the idea of expression, being able to express, have voice, develop craft, of course, to envision. I think that's one thing we don't always think about, but the arts allow us to imagine things that don't necessarily exist yet, that no one's ever done, or that you can't you can't quite put your finger on, but you can start working on it. You can have an idea and you can put it into something. That's something that I like to talk a lot about. You know, that the arts allow us to put something that's ephemeral, like an idea, that you're fleeting, into some kind of piece. And then that piece, with that piece, whatever it is, a poem, a piece of ceramic, anything, you can then share that with others and start a conversation. To understand the arts community, you know, what kind of arts is out in the community, to observe. That's a lot of my personal work that I do with children is about observing nature. So I even go to UBC, to the BD Biodiversity Museum, and I get these wonderful specimen boxes. I just confirmed one today for a forest box where children will be able to see and touch and draw bear's fur, or the wing of a bald eagle, all kinds of natural things that they can learn about. And we spend a lot of time looking closely, and then, well, how could we draw that? What does that feel like? How can we show that in our drawing? And there's never, for me, a right or wrong answer. There's just learning and seeing how we all can try something different and learn from each other. So that's another really big part of the studio program, is that we're not in separate silos. You know, we don't all always have our own little piece of paper doing our own little thing, but we're encouraged to see other people's strategies and ask them, well, how did you do that? Can you show me? Or so engage and persist, you know, that to keep working at something, that it's not always easy. It's not a one and done. That's what I found in the beginning when I started working with children, that they kind of looked at it as a task and then they were done. And now we've kind of stretched that it's not like, it's something that they're allowed to take time on. Because I think often in school, things are rushed along so much that they're not allowed to really engage and go deeply into things. And the studio provides that. And then at the end, we have the reflection. So going back and having group discussions, and seeing how how does this work connect to other people's work? How does it connect to the world? What does it remind you of? So all these like ways to interconnect. Anyway, so that's the studio habits of mind. And I think they're something that really can grow, you know, in everybody, no matter what their capacity is in the arts, so to speak. You know, you don't have to be an expert when you start. I think that's the biggest, I think that's the biggest, even for young children. I'm not good at this. You know, I got that a lot in the beginning. I don't know how to draw this. So let's look closely. What shapes do you see? So really breaking it down, because even I think by grade 3, children are already kind of censoring themselves as, I'm not good at this. And then I just don't know who actually gets to high school and feels that they're good at it, you know? Anyway, that'll be an equity piece. We'll talk about that later.
Cartoonist Linda Berry has this great sort of discussion around that, and she calls it the 2 questions. And those 2 questions are, is it good and does it suck? And she says that at some point those 2 questions come to everybody, and that becomes the only thing that's important about your art, right? And she said that she stopped doing art for a long time because of those 2 questions, and then slowly came back to it. She said, but many people don't. They just never come back once they realize that art can be good, and they don't feel like theirs is. But there's that beautiful quote, the forest would be really quiet if only the birds with the best voices were allowed to sing. Right? Yeah. So, yeah, everything to what you said.
Could you repeat that, please? I didn't quite
Oh,
to hear.
The forest would
Cool.
be very quiet if only the birds with the best voices were allowed to sing. And I probably sort of changed it my own way because I'm an artist and that's what I do. Winnie or Ariel, would you like to weigh in on the subject of big questions and how we can address them through art?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. I mean, I love the meandering way this question is being addressed. It's really beautiful. I looked at your work, Rebecca, and your links that you sent, and it was very powerful. And your photography was just gorgeous, especially the trip you made. It was it to Israel and to the Palestine. That was very powerful work, and talk about a big idea. And I think yeah, it was just gorgeous. And I think part of the beautiful piece of making art with kids, and you know, I always start, I do an art foundations class, and it's multi-grade, and there's kids in there from grade 9 all the way to grade 12, because there's never enough. I work at a very small high school, and so the cohorts of kids are never big enough to have a full complement of grade 9s, because there's not 30 grade 9s. So they mix at grade 9, 10, or, you know, often I have grade 9 to 12 in the same class. And I never assume that because a student is in grade 12, that they are more capable than the student in grade 9. Maybe with their skills, perhaps, if they've worked at it and persisted and developed, but more often than not, a student will arrive in grade 12 art never having thought about art since elementary school. And I will talk to them about their experiences. I say, you know, in kindergarten, you probably got a journal that was full blank pages, and you were told to draw your experiences, and you would go in there and you'd get your crayon and you'd just draw, and it'd be so wonderful, and you'd have these magnificent drawings. And then in grade 1, you were probably given these, you know, you started to learn how to print, so you were given these half journals, half a blank page and then half lined on the bottom. They're like, oh yeah, that's right. I said, yeah. And then you were allowed to draw on the top, and then the bottom you had to write about what you were drawing. And they're like, yeah, that's true. I'm like, okay. And then in grade 2, you were given fully lined. There was no room to draw, except some of you did, didn't you? And they're like, yeah. Some of you actually went and drew on the lines, didn't you? You drew like all over the pages, and you didn't write at all, did you? And they're like, that's right. I'm like, yeah. And then probably every group activity that you were in, you were the one who drew, weren't you? And they're like, yeah, they always made me draw the poster, and they made me draw the stuff. And I'm like, right. And it was awesome, wasn't it? And you got encouragement, and you learned how to do it, and you felt good about it, and you kept drawing. And guess what? You're probably a really good drawer, because your peers and everyone around you encouraged you, and we knew you were going to keep doing it. And then you arrive in my class and you're a great drawer, but everyone else stopped drawing in grade 2, right? And so you are here in my class, and we're just gonna have fun. Art is not about drawing. Art is about ideas. Art is about responding to ideas through expression, and that can be a sculpture. That can be a photograph, a collage. It can be about anything. And so whenever I approach art projects with my students, the first thing we do is really, I make sure they're confident enough in their skills that they can tackle the issue. But really, we start with a big idea, and we start with something that we can talk about first and become familiar with in a global context or in a community context. I'll just let you know that the school I teach at is an inner city school, and one of the big issues in our community right now is homelessness. And so these projects that we talk about and what kids bring up in their own, like by their own virtue of lived experience is really poignant and pertinent. And I teach a lot of kids who are, there's one art class I'm in right now, and there's a boy from the Congo who arrived in Canada a year ago. In the same class as a boy from Syria who arrived in Canada 2 years ago. In the same class as 2 Indigenous kids, and in the same class as another, a couple kids of European settler descent. And that's my class, 6 of them. So, you know, we're talking about big ideas, and all of their ideas are big. All of their ideas are big. And so to offer projects to them that just allow them to respond through the lens that they know, right? Like, I'm not telling them to, I'm not prescriptive in my project. I'm skill building, I'm process driven, and it's in a response to an idea that they are working on themselves, that they need to have some kind of control over, or lens that they look through. And it's quite beautiful, like watching their art evolve in that context. And I'm quite privileged to be the one to kind of like facilitate that for them. So I think that the only way for some of these kids into the big ideas that they want to express or they need to think about is through art, is through mark making, is through, you know, abstract expressionism, is through big paper with charcoal. It is through these just this media that I can offer, and these artists we look at in their own cultures and contexts that we can muse on and think about and talk about. You know, I had to write an email to a parent today to talk about her daughter yesterday, who is a perfectionist and who was so blocked by her not achieving perfection. So everything else was just out the window. So the email I wrote to her, I said, this isn't about art. This is about the idea that your daughter's really stopping herself. Like, it's a real barrier to any ideas flowing. And it's going to be something that I think we need to talk about. So, you know, and she was so appreciative of the email, because art is a bigger thing than drawing and painting. Art is a big thing. Art is a big deal. And it's in the air. It's what we breathe. And we're so used to breathing it that it's become something that's just been normalized, and we don't think about it. And we need to think about it, because it's a really important way for people to express.
Awesome. Thank you. Winnie, would you like to chime in?
Thank you so much for all the offerings, Rebecca and Ariel and Maggie. Thank you for like just giving us the context for how you know, arts in education got to where it is now. I think it's so important to frame that. Just riffing off of what Ariel, you know, your last point about this particular student and the perfectionism. I did write a little note to myself today about how art is about process and purpose and not perfection. And that inherent in art making and art doing and art learning is that sense of, you know, again, going back to that word practice, right? Like that it is inherent in itself, not about product and perfection, but about that process and that purpose. So just wanted to connect back to that thought. One of the quotes that I've been carrying in my heart, in my mind for many, many months now is from Bell Hooks, who's an author, an African-American social activist and professor. And she says that the function of art is to do more than tell it like it is. It's to imagine what is possible. And how, for me, that relates to, you know, using art to facilitate discussion and understanding about big issues is that, you know, art is what touches us and moves us in ways where we then connect to our imagination, and we can conceive of things that are not yet. And I think that social justice, environmental and climate justice, those are, you know, there are possibilities, right? And art helps to open us up to possibilities. And especially when I think about nurturing young leaders, they are stepping into a world where, yeah, they need to use their imagination to help us solve some of these big crises and issues that we've created over multiple generations and that they are inheriting. So I think that one of the other things that I think about too is how important it is to expose and expand students to artists and art practices from those who are from marginalized identities and communities. I think about growing up and really not ever seeing artists who look like me. I identify as a Chinese Canadian settler from Hong Kong. Growing up in Canada, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of Eurocentric art that I experienced in the limited experiences that I had of the arts. And and I don't mean this, like, I don't mean representation and diversity in art experiences and exposure, just the sort of like festivals idea or that idea of like, tokenistic or stereotyped arts from various communities. I think for me, it was so powerful to see like a contemporary artist of Chinese descent. Like, to me, that connection, not necessarily to traditional art forms from my, my cultural background, yeah, was so powerful. I think so the opportunity to connect young people to artists that are from racialized identities, from communities, LGBTQ2+. I think that so important for young people to, well, one, see more diversity, but to also see themselves reflected back in the arts. So I leave that thought too.
Thank you. Again, I'm taking off my moderator hat because I have the power to do that. And I wanted to go back to something that Ariel had talked about, perfectionism, and give sort of a little example. So, well, I'll back up for a minute. So before I started working as a teaching artist, teaching art, then the reason that I started doing that was I had been working in social services, doing work around eating disorder prevention, parent education, self-esteem. And I realized that the only people that I was seeing were people who had self-identified as needing support in those areas, where we all need support in many of those areas. And I thought that I could reach more people in a more kind of organic way through art. So my art practice, and I'm a weaver, it's not at all precision based at all. It's messy, it's flawed. It incorporates whatever people want to do, no matter how terrible they think they are. It can all sort of fit into this interconnected web that becomes a metaphor for a community, that we all bring our own perspective and skills and abilities and interests. And when you connect all of those threads together, we form a community that's bigger and better than any of us alone. So I'm kind of going on a ramble. I said I was going to give you a concrete example. Anyway, I was teaching art camps at Place des Arts for elementary age kids in the summer, and traditional drawing, painting type things. But one of the things that I don't allow, and it's about the only rule that I have, is I do not allow erasers. And that is terrifying for many kids. And this little girl, she came to class, she said, I really need an eraser. I said, no, sir, you can't have an eraser. And she said, but the circle that I've drawn on this paper is not good enough. And they said, well, how do you know it's not good enough? I didn't say it had to be a perfect circle. I just said, draw a circle. so I said, just, you're going to work with it. It's going to be fine. Anyway, she left that first day of class, and I found 5 pieces of paper in the garbage with imperfectly drawn circles. And this little girl was really hard on herself, and I had her for 2 weeks. But by the end of the second week, she was just throwing paint on the page, and it was just a big mess, and there were blobs everywhere, and she was just having the best time. She was just thoroughly enjoying herself. And she said, I'm going to turn this blob into a witch. And she was just like with abandon drawing this witch on the paper. And I said to her, do you remember the first day you walked into this class and you couldn't draw those circles? And she said, yeah. And I said, do you remember how you feel right now? I said, think about how you feel right now and compare that to how you felt that first day you walked into my class. Do you see the difference? And I said, I want you to go out into your life and experience this joy and abandon and lack of caring for the rest of your life everywhere. And I don't know if she did, but I know that my daughters occasionally tell me, sometimes things happen in my life and I can hear your voice in the back of the back of my head. And I think about, what would my mom say about this? My mom always has something interesting to say. So I hope that little girl carries that little voice in the back of her head for the rest of her life every time she feels like she's not good enough. So I think that that's what art education can bring to people, if it's done in that way, that it's not about a product, that it's not about a commodity or something that has to be a certain way, that it's about self-expression and joy. And talking about diversity, so when I'm doing the weaving, I talk about how, different people's weaving is different sizes, different colors. It has lumps and bumps. It's just like all of us, right? We're all different. And that doesn't mean that any of us is less valuable or less good than somebody else. It's just different. That's my take. And now we'd like to, what time? I need better glasses. I think we've got time. So I know there's some comments that have come up in the chat. If Jinwin would like to read any of them out, and if anybody has anything that they'd like to pipe in on, either the hands up icon, type it in. Jesus, I see you've got something. Do you want? Let's go ahead with Jesus while Jinwin is not saying anything. Is she still here?
Yeah, I'm here. Just
okay, Jesus.
Okay, Jesus, go ahead.
Hello.
Hola.
Hola. Newly arrived here, newly immigrant also, freshly arrived into Burnaby. First of all, I'm absolutely impressed to hear my name pronounced correctly. It's not an easy name for any English speaker, even if it's religious nerve, it's just really weird.
Es porque yo soy de México.
Eso lo explica. That explains it all. I just want to make a small note that specific moment between the 3 panelists about perfectionism was beautiful. I even took a little bit of a note when Ariel mentioned that perfectionism was blocking the ideas, and then Winnie came up with purpose and process. And at the end, we end up with a quote that art goes against product and perfection. I work for an industry that is based on products, art, and perfection. So it's the holy grail of the impossible. And I work for Disney. I work in the movie industry, which is one of the harshest areas that you can work as an artist, because it's based on really knowledgeable and with amazing eye of every day going and destroying what you do, and every day taking it to the utmost perfection that you can to show it the next day. And one of the things that the only way that you can survive that is iteration. So the perfection in art doesn't exist, but the iteration that you can get through the process, it's what makes the result valuable. it's not just the process, because the process is a self-learning curve, but the iteration over a single small little note or a small little error can lead to a grandiose idea. And taking into that, I will have to go against the quote that Winnie said, sadly, that I think that product can be achieved in art as long as it has soul and intent. Because what's important is iteration will be to repeat and repeat over and over again over the same process. So it's the process of repeating and pruning slowly until you have like the grinding of something, until you get the smooth at the end of the pad. You can think of the katana process of smelting, and I think that that's the closest that you can get to perfection in art. And like living in an industry like the one that I live, that your result is not just for artists, it's for everyone else, and everyone else compares it with the one before and with the one that is next to it. So there's no way that you can get to everyone, and it's always going to be bad or worse than the next big thing, and it's always idealized. And the way that you can get into this, it's just by iterating and just to trying to prune and find perfection. If you get it as a product into just a process of trying to evolve into the result. So that was the input I wanted to get.
Thank you very much. Yes. And that's a whole different thing when you start working as an artist, and the expectations that like you said, the expectations that things have to be a certain way and better than the one before, right? When you're working in the movie industry, that's a whole different level. But thank you. Y yo aprendo español. Muy mal.
Gracias. Now that the first, just the fact of trying, to be honest, Spanish itself, for an English speaker, like it's very normal for a non-English speaker to learn another language, but for an English speaker to go through the process of learning a new language, it proves interested, not survival. So it's completely different nowadays.
So what I said was I'm learning Spanish, and as a weaver, there's a lot of weaving in the Latin American world, and I've spent time in several different countries, but my ability to communicate is very limited, so it's partially self-serving. But also, as a teacher of students coming in to learn art and feeling fearful, and I tell them that it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to be imperfect. Well, I need to model that as well, because art is easy for me. I don't have those insecurities about art, but I certainly have them about other areas. And, speaking a different language is difficult for everyone. So I'm modeling I'm practicing what I preach. Were there any other comments or questions that people have?
I was just going to say that I really believe that part of my job is to model mistakes all the time and out myself as, I don't know how this is going to turn out, guys. I'm going to do this demo. Let's just check it out. I don't know. And then sometimes they're horrible. Like completely, they're like, Ms. That's like really bad. I'm like, okay, I'm going to try again, and just that cycle of, and I'm a ceramic artist, a potter. So that process is like so intense, like from beginning to end is like a month long. And at any stage, it can completely fall apart. And by the time you get it to the kiln, it's not even up to me anymore. I make a little kiln god that I put up there and I say, please let my pieces survive, right? And then I hope and I pray. And that's it, but I was going to say, in the class that we had this big class conversation about perfectionism, And it was the boy from the Congo who looked at me, he goes, okay, well, what would you rather have? Something that's perfect or something that's just good? And I looked at him and I said, I would way rather have the good thing. If something's perfect, I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to play with it. I'm never going to like let anyone take it off the shelf. No one's going to ever get any enjoyment out of it. Like nothing. I would way rather have the good thing and then have it in my life as something I can enjoy. And they all kind of went, They all thought that was kind of weird, but it gave them pause and it gave them a moment to kind of consider this striving for perfection. I mean, we had like it kept coming up, like the class was about an hour and 45 minutes long, and it kind of kept like bubbling up every now and then. One of them would go, what about this scenario, Ms. Boulet? What about this scenario? And I'd be like, no, I'd still rather have the good. I'm not interested in the perfect, right? I'm just not. And you can be interested in it, but please know, you'll never actually be perfect. You'll always be really, really good, maybe, right? That's got to be good enough. So
I don't know about you, but when I take art classes, and I share this with my students a lot, if there are 20 people in the class and I can subjectively say that 2 people are better artists than I am, I don't care that there are 17 people that are not as good as me. I will only compare myself negatively to those 2 people that I think are better. And it's just this weird, and I just have to remind myself that art is not a competition all the time. And I don't know what that's about, but I'm doing a little bit of self-therapy here now.
Thank you. I just have a few comments, not a lot, but just had obviously thank you to Jesus for the contribution. That was really great. Well said. And then Tammy says that process builds resilience, the desire to persevere. And my current work is a product of all the experiments and explorations that have come before.
Yeah.
So, yes.
And what Jesus said about iterations, that's so important, right? Art is not something you do once. You do, and it goes back to the inquiry-based learning, right? You do something, then you do a reflection. So what would I change next time? And you try something with a little bit of change, and that's how you refine your process. And that's not just about art, that's about everything. There's so many things that we do in life that you don't just get one chance. You just have to keep doing it over. Even conversations that we might have with our partners, right? Oh, that didn't quite go as well as I thought it should have. Well, what should I do differently next time? Pens, paper, and paint is a good way to try those things out without big consequences or risks, right?
But yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I was not supposed to talk, but
I'm supposed to be the moderator, right?
I'm just saying,
I'm talking.
I'm just saying, but I think just going back to a little bit to the education system though, and what we have talked about already, it's like, does the education system right now is set up to allow that, not only in the arts, but even in the writing and the math, allow that time for that process to happen, for that reflection to happen about, I made this, it doesn't really look the way I wanted, or it doesn't express what I wanted, let me try again. Does it allow that? Like, yeah.
Does it fully allow it? Probably not.
Yeah, I would. It was interesting that when Dawn, you were talking, and June, when you hit the nail on the head. Last night my son was tasked for homework to write a spoken word piece, and he was so obsessed with getting it perfect. The cadence of it, the words, and he was so frustrated because he, literally, as Junwen said, it's not set up for him to have an opportunity to revise that piece or to write it and then revisit it and then reiterate it, and everything that I was telling him, which is writers don't get it right the first time. You can't make something in its final form in one shot. And yet here is the contradictory experience that he's having of his teacher saying, well, for homework, you're going to write this poem, and tomorrow you have to hand it in. And so, you know, in one evening, how is a person supposed to experience that idea of iteration? I mean, one can't. So I think you're right, Junwen, that within the learning environment, and especially this particular year, you know, as Ariel as a teacher, you know, it has acknowledged, like, it's just a weird year to teach. But I think even in regular times that students don't get to, children do not get to experience that idea of practice and getting things right over time and over multiple iterations.
Ariel?
I was just going to say, Winnie, as someone who, you know, I teach drama as well. I have my degree is in theater before any of the visual arts happened. Often I will assign students to do the worst job of whatever assignment possible. So the worst music lip sync you can do, that's your homework, guys. Or draw the worst person you can, like just bad, make it bad. And then we're not afraid to look at it and say, wow, that's so bad. It's like, really, wow, you nailed it. You well done, you know? Or I'll juxtapose things, or I'll say, okay, out of clay, we're gonna make the ugliest fish you can out of the fish head. And then after it's fired, we're gonna like paint it in the most beautiful colors and, you know, shinies and everything else. So like just freeing up, like I feel for your son, because I have also kids who are stuck in this finite kind of, you know, write a poem now, make it good. You know, it's like, I can't do it, right? And there's no time for that whole, right now, there's no time for the iteration. There's no time for the reflection, and there's no time for the response cycle that needs to happen. But I really believe this is a finite piece of our system, like a finite piece of our lives, and it will go back to more fulsome productivity or process. And I really have to believe that, because I think that a lot of people are suffering through really abbreviated experiences right now that don't provide much soul or understanding. And yeah, it's harsh. It's harsh out there. It's really harsh. And yeah, let your kid know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Kathy, sorry.
No, go ahead. Oh, Kathy, you had a question?
Yeah, I think Kathy had her hand up, or were you clapping? I'm not sure.
Oh,
Shula?
Shula. Yeah, Shula has it.
You have to unmute, Shula.
Unmute, Shula.
I can't hear you, Shula.
No.
There I am. Now you can.
Okay.
Yeah. I used to teach. I stopped teaching after 3 years. Greatly, you know why I stopped teaching after 3 years. It was too painful to push for product, and I couldn't do it. And a story that I heard about in a writing class I took about this man, very famous, I can't remember his name, it's been a few years ago, author who wrote a book. He was quite an activist. He had gone to jail. It was some African country where there was great conflict. And he had written this very famous book. And 10 years later, he rewrote the whole thing. And people were shocked. It wasn't just an update. No, he rewrote the whole thing. And he said, well, it took me 10 years to actually think it through. You know, I got stopped. I needed 10 more years to actually get there. And I think it's kind of, I don't know, something maybe to do with kids in class is to assess or just think about, how did that particular project feel for you? because some things really speak to kids, some processes, some materials, some things. And sometimes it's about trying to figure out what of all that smorgasbord speaks to you and is yours. You won't get to explore it enough. If it's really yours, you probably won't get to explore it enough through your whole life. But at least you have get to taste many things if you're lucky, and figure out and make a note to yourself in your journal or in your heart, that was mine. I'm going to eat that a lot. Not just in class. I'm going to eat that out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Maggie?
Maggie, did you? Can't hear. Yeah.
Sorry, I
Good.
was trying to unmute.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the conversation and the trajectory and this always the tension between the process and the product. And I think for students, and partly because the arts are so devalued, and we see the arts, or the arts is seen as being produced by a genius or someone that has special talent. And therefore, we don't need to actually educate, because if you're going to be
born that way,
you're just born that way. It's not something that everyone has the capacity to do, which we all know is not true. And so there is a lot of fear. There's this expectation that somehow something will be sort of fully formed, right? Like that you have this idea, and what comes out, you have this image of perfection, right? And because the process is not taught in school, and you don't have that experience with it, when you run into difficulties and when it's not working, you're seeing that, or kids see that as an indication of failure, or an indication that they are not creative, or this is not their talent. And really, it's just a lack of experience in the process. And so I always tell this, my students, particularly the older ones, the younger ones, they're all into the process. It's all good for them. And say that, the art making process has an arc. And you start out in this sort of euphoric, imagined journey that is going to take place, and everything is wonderful. And then it's not working. It starts to not work. And that's not a sign of failure. That is actually the invitation to move into art making, right? Because that's when you're wrestling with your ideas and your materials, and you're refining what it is that is becoming, right? Like art isn't something that you've already decided and then you do it. Art is something that becomes, and I think it's in that process that the transformational power of art exists, right? And you discover something about yourself and something about your relationship to the idea. And that's why art is so powerful, right? That is when art becomes something living rather than something that's copied or, and what Winnie was talking about, art as the space of possibility, right? And that's how art becomes an empowering tool. It enables us to envision something completely different. But that happens through the multiple iterations and that sort of wrestling and encountering the accident and the surprise that turns you right around, and being open to that. Yeah, I wanted to add too, just in relationship to the original question, that's why art actually is starting to have a significant role in peacekeeping. And artists are being used to help navigate spaces of intractable conflict, because they can create a space for a new way of envisioning, a new way of seeing the other, that doesn't fall back into sort of patterns. And I think that's the space of hope, right? Like if we can imagine something other, then we can have courage to live into something different.
What you just said, that I mean, that is that is as big as you can get, really. But I wanted to add, when you were talking about the process and things, I was at a workshop with a well-known textile artist named India Flint, and something that she wrote on the board at the end of the class was, everything is beautiful in the end, and if it isn't beautiful, it isn't the end. So I think we're pretty much out of time now, but we were going to, we didn't get to the last question. The last question is really an invitation to all of you to think about, you know, we talked about how art education is often not the highest priority in our school system, but what can each of us do to, if not change that, but at least move that forward into a direction where our politicians and our decision makers within the province or within your own school district know that their constituents value art in education and want it to be a priority. And some of the things that we were talking about, Rebecca mentioned the AIRS program, and Maggie's involved with that as well. And I know Tammy and Jinwin are involved with that program as well. And that is a program that brings professional artists to work in elementary schools in the Vancouver School District. But I believe it's only available within the Vancouver School District. And the program that Winnie works with, Art Starts in the Schools, supports artists, professional artists, to go in and do a special specific project in schools throughout the province. And similarly to the program that I work with, the Vancouver Biennale also pays artists to go and do projects within schools. So those are some examples of ways that artists can engage students in the school, but it would be really helpful if all of you could think of ways that you can make it known to the decision makers, the people who fund these types of programs, that these are important things that you value. So talk to your local MLA, talk to your local parent advisory committee, I think they're called. PAC stands for Parent Advisory Committee. If you have kids in school, or talk to your local, contact your local school trustees. They're elected officials, and they should listen to their constituents and listen to what you think is important. And I think I'm just going to put up one last quote here that Winnie had shared with us, that I think really is so important. It really puts this into context. After all, our future doesn't just include young people, it depends on them. It won't be long before they step out of their childhoods and into our increasingly troubled world. If we want them to have the creative powers necessary to solve the problems we're leaving behind, then now more than ever, students need the arts. And that just really says it all: creative powers and problem solving. So, and this was from a Time magazine article. It's available online. It's from December 21st, 2020. And it's attributed to, it's from an article by Frank, Gary, and Melissa, and I did not misspell her name, that's the way it's spelled in the article, Melissa Ferrucci Shriver. And I'm better at pronouncing Spanish than Italian, apparently. But there you go. And I've got a quote, something here. Ariel says, I ask students if they're struggling or if they're feeling like this is tough, and they say yes, and I say good. That's the right feeling. Welcome to being an artist. So that is, oh, and something has taken over my screen and I can't stop sharing. There it is, stop share. Okay, so I think that's all the time that we have. And thank you all for your input, and I would love to continue the conversation, but my husband's making me do work stuff tonight. I have to go pay bills.
Thank you, Dawn, very much. I'm gonna just stop the removal spotlight so we can all see each other. But thank you very much, Dawn, for moderating these. Thank you also for the panelists, of course, Ariel and Winnie and Rebecca. And thank you very much, Maggie, for joining us. That's amazing. I mean, I gotta be honest before everybody leaves. I was in my dream world. Like, I could live in this space forever. You guys are amazing. I was just like, and I know Grant was like, me and Grant were smiling the entire time. And we were like, oh my God, we just want to stay here the whole time, talking about arts and, you know, coming up with these amazing quotes. And I just absolutely love it. So even if it was just for me, this was just amazing. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for all of you, Tammy, Maggie, you're fantastic. Jesus, thank you for joining us. That was a great contribution. We really appreciate it. I think this was an amazing conversation. I don't mind hanging out a little bit longer if anybody has anything else that want to add, I think Rebecca, but whoever wants to leave, feel free to leave. Just a reminder that we still have 2 more days of Stride. Super pumped about it. This has been an amazing 2 weeks. I think we have gotten really good reviews from all of the people participating, and we are just thrilled that we were able to make this happen for these 2 weeks. So we are super excited that we still have 1 more talk tomorrow. Myself and Grant are going to be guests with Carl and Sullivan. If you're not too tired of us yet, maybe you can join tomorrow because we happen to appear in every event. And then we're talking about our own filmmaking and photography processes. So I think that's going to be fun. And then on Saturday, we have Rebecca's nature photography workshop online exhibition. After 4 sessions, they're going to show the photography the products. After talking so much about the process, it's going to be the process. But it was a great sessions with Rebecca. So they're going to show that, and then we're going to do closing remarks there at that time. That's an online as well. And then we have a concert by a band, Living Like Larry. That's going to be our closing concert at 8 o'clock. And that's going to be just a stream. It's not on Zoom. It's going to be streamed on YouTube. And we'll have our link on our website. So thank you again for all of it. Thank you so much. And as I said, we can hang out here longer. I'll be happy.
There was one thing I wanted to share. It didn't get into the discussion, but I think I heard it yesterday on CBC. It might have been on the Ideas program. And it had to do with what if we imagined artists as essential workers? And I think during COVID, a lot of us have run to, whether it's Netflix or any kind of arts. And this person, I have to kind of fact check it, but they said that that the arts are Canada's biggest export, bigger than any other resource. I don't know if that's actually true, but bigger than oil, bigger than lumber. And why don't we treat it like that? I mean, that goes to kind of someone like, Jesus that works in a big industry. But it's not as though, people just end up in that industry. They need preparation, right? They come from something. So like, why aren't we actually putting resources, quite frankly, into the arts? Because it's not, it does produce money. Not saying that that's the end goal, but I just thought it was like a reframing of this moment and thinking about artists as something that's really essential rather than a backdoor fluff stuff, pom-poms. You get the picture. But
yes, for sure. Anybody?
Yeah.
Well, I think actually, you all know, I think I have long conversations with all of you about this topic. And most of you know exactly what I stand. But I think one of the important things for me in this conversation about the education system is because we really need to change the mind, we have to shift the thinking of the society, and where else do we start? That with the children. I think that would be the the right way to start, because then they will carry on into, you know, changing this perspective that art is something so, you know, as we mentioned many times, like based on something that we hang, is an ornament, or is something that is on the side, or is something that is completely removed from our lives, that it has nothing to do with math and reading and all that stuff. Like art is everywhere, right? And it's completely integral to our society and to our lives. But we somehow bought into now this idea that is like, it's not an essential part, you know, it's not, you know, is not integrated with anything else. It's supposed to be taught, you know, after school. So it's like, how do we change it back to it's essential, right?
I don't know if I have the answer to that, but kind of further to that point, I think something that makes art get sidelined a bit is that it's hard to grade, it's hard to mark, it's hard to assess if something is the correct answer or not. And at least in Western society, as far as I can tell, that's held in high regard. If you can remember things, memorize things, regurgitate things, you're considered smart. There are lots of people who can innovate and cross-connect within those fields, and they are celebrated for sure. But I don't think that people get art enough to allow it to flourish and to be okay with not getting it and understanding it. It's not supposed to be something that's understood. It came up tonight, I can't remember who said it, I remember writing it down, that art isn't, Ariel, I think you may have mentioned, art isn't about drawing, it's about ideas. And that we've circulated around it many times. And I think that might make some people uncomfortable, to be honest. Is that too blunt a stance to take on that?
Not sure what you mean, because it's not what people expect of art, or
it doesn't. I don't know. It's not that. Art isn't what if they can't put it into a box and understand it in a
Right.
linear kind of way.
Right.
I think
Right.
a large percentage of the world is very linear, and you know that can be super productive and
Yes.
lead to wonderful things in its own.
Yeah.
But it doesn't allow for, or it doesn't include art. It doesn't take art on that same ride, and it's not held in the same regard.
Yeah.
And it's not like everyone's going, come on, art, come with us. It's gonna be awesome. Some of us are gonna go straight. We want you to go around the side and figure something different out, and that'll be an awesome result as well. I don't think the system is set up that way.
So if art doesn't result in a pretty picture, if it's, you know, something that's conceptual or idea based, like you said, that my daughter has this really great phrase that she used once, and I love it. She says, the kind of art that people who don't know anything about art like to make fun of. So, you know, I'm thinking about things like Yoko Ono's Dada and Fluxus art that is nonsensical but brings about discussion and brings about, you know, an introduction to ideas and concepts that you may not otherwise be able to access, right?
Yep.
But that kind of art makes people uncomfortable because they don't know what to do with it.
It challenges us to think and to question our understanding of reality.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that can be difficult.
Yeah.
Hard to put some people don't like being put in that position.
Yeah.
So they say, I don't
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
And they just move on.
Yeah.
Whereas
think-
if you spend some time there, I mean, and it's quite systematic. You know, it comes from a very young age as well. They're kind of, you learn to you're either an artist, or you either like or get art, or you're none of those things. And you know, I'm fine with that. I mean, so that's their quote, not mine. So they diverge from that idea of creative thinking and all the things that we've been talking about tonight, and they leave that to the artists, in quotes. And some of them kind of venture in and they use art as a product, or they look to art and artists for entertainment, but they don't think of themselves as having art inside them, or the creative tools and the joy or the the immersion of arts as artful living inside them. They don't realize that they do.
I think it's a little bit about like consumption. Like we think art is just to be consumed in some way, you know,
It's a
bought and
thing.
sold, but
Yeah.
also that you have to get it. You know, oh, I got it. You know, I understand it. I get it. Let's move on. And if you don't get it, you know, that I guess the idea that art is to be experienced and to be questioned rather than consumed. I don't know if that's that clear.
Yeah,
somehow?
that's kind of where I'm going too, and I think that's partly where I think the idea around art gallery snobbery comes from. Whereas if some people are super intimidated by going into an art gallery or approaching art that is non-representational, for example, and they think, oh, everyone else gets it but me, or that person, that really nicely dressed person at the white desk in the white gallery, they get it and I don't, so I must not belong here. So it's I'm not saying we can solve this overnight, but and maybe I don't know if it can be solved. It's not a problem to be solved, maybe, but I think on an individual basis, you know, we as artists, I think, have the responsibility to nudge the people who don't think they're artists to change their view, and I think that might be something there.
These are
Ariel?
beautiful opportunities for education, right? This is my job. When kids, this is why every kid should be in art all through school, so that we can have these conversations before they, like the quote at the end of this panel said, before they go out into the world and become citizens of the world, they are educated on how to approach people's expressions, how to have a fully, kind of like a full experience of people's ideas. I mean, art kind of exists in these distilled moments, right? Like a photograph, you know, except for film, animation, you know, there's theater, right? And even theater is so ephemeral, like live theater. You are not there at the play that night in that performance. It's, you know, you can't capture a play in theater on film. It's just not the same, right? Like these moments that get distilled, and you walk, you know, you go to New York on a special trip, and you go to the you know, or you go to London, or you go to any gallery in the world, and it's a moment of your time meeting a moment of this artist's time.
Yes.
And how to approach it, how do you respond to it? I mean, are you looking only at the, you know, there's all of these entry points that are, you know, you can teach, you can actually talk to, you know, are you just interested in how it looks? Or are you interested in the story behind it? Or are you interested in the artist's story behind it and how they came to paint this? And, you know, or are you interested in the cultural context that it was painted in? Like, these are things that you can go into a gallery knowing, and then be appreciative of the abstract expressionism or the distill or the whatever crazy, wacky, you know, moment in art you're looking at, that you can appreciate. But that all has to do with like this education. This all has to do with these lucky kids who have taken art in high school. They get it. They can do it, because that's our job as educators, is to bring them through that and bring them to that and take them on field trips and talk about it in that way. And then they become capable. They're capable, right? And that's part of the human experience, is feeling capable around things that you see and experience. That gives you confidence. That gives you this thing about, you know, this thing that you get yourself. You have your own way to respond, because you have a lens that you can look through. So, I mean, the call to arms at the end of the panel discussion to go and talk to your MLAs and get this happening is really, I mean, it's pretty important. It's pretty important.
It's like a literacy. It's like a visual literacy in a language. And if we, you know, you're not going to get it overnight. You have to practice it. You have to pay attention. You have to take notice. You have to talk about it, right? Rather than just, you know, go into a museum once and say, oh, I don't know, this is too much. Right?
But, well, Yeah, but even if it's not, the goal is not to educate them to go into a museum, even if the goal is just to help them be curious about life and observe, like in your graphic that you had, Rebecca, like just look around and observe the details that then later on can translate into going into a gallery and going into a painting and look at the details in that painting and then just be blow your mind by it. But just like that action of observation can come from arts education, right? Because everything else is just moving, keep moving, go through the pages, fill up the time, the sheets, and keep moving, right? But just to have that time to slow down, and art can do that. Art can help us focus on the process. Art can help us on actually observe what's around us and think about it and give us that time to reflect and all that stuff. But then, as Ariel said, like only like kids get it in one, like kids are only 1 year that they get that, and in 1 year you can't really, process all that. Like I feel extremely, like lucky that I'm from Mexico and I study my high school in a high school for the performing arts. So I had 3 years of completely full on arts education, right? That was like this amazing experience for me that completely changed my life and the way I look at everything, right? But I had like 3 full years, like I was full on doing everything, drama, music, dance, the visual arts. We did everything, right? I was in school from 8 to 4, doing math and all that stuff, but most of the times doing art, and but most of the people don't do, like the majority of the people, they don't, like I'm one of the very few, that had that opportunity.
I think that there's the pervasive idea that to appreciate, not just to do art, but to appreciate art, you need to be a certain kind of person. You need to have talent. And like, you were saying, if you don't get abstract art, it's not for you. But, by comparison, in other aspects of life, do we believe that if you're not going to be a top tier professional athlete, you should not participate in any sporting activity at all, right? No, we don't think that. We think that, going and kicking a ball around in the park on a Saturday afternoon is a perfectly good activity, and no one says, oh, well, no, I'm not talented, so I'm not going to do that. I don't know all the right moves. Or, do we think that only the top mathematical minds in the world are the only people who need to know how to add and subtract? No, we all need to know how to do that, right? But somehow we don't feel, not us, but the world doesn't feel that way about art. And I know that I promised I was going to bring that Danny Gregory quote about art with a capital A, taking years of suffering and sacrifice in art school. And, it's a commodity and it's something that goes under the gavel and is hung in galleries and stuff like that. But the rest of us, there's art with a small a that the rest of us can do. And I didn't bring the quote with me, so I'm totally paraphrasing. But that understanding that we can all do art, we can all express ourselves, we can all have a voice, and that is so important. That is the most important thing right now, is that we all have a voice, we all have that ability to speak up. And this is another, I collect quotes. This is another quote by one of my weaving idols. She said, "Women all over the world speak the same language, the language of silence."
Wow.
So that alone, if you can practice using your voice by drawing a picture in there's so little risk involved in doing that. It's just that thin end of the wedge that lets you speak up, eventually speak up for yourself.
Awesome.
I think that about education, and there's certain things I wanted to ask the panelists, but we ran out of time. I think the problem of education and art by itself, it's us as artists. I know that it's hard, but I think we struggle a lot to divide and rolling again into product and art, that education is a product. So they're nemesis. Educating art and not the process of education, but education as a whole in society is a product. It's because it's a process to succeed. And success and art are also things that are not compatible. They are a part of the path, but that's probably because you achieve a point, you reach success, and then you fail again, and then you start again. So success is not a continuous, and art is one of the things that shows that the most. And I think that the biggest error that we focus on, and that's why art has been failing as something to upsell in education, is that we don't know how to create it as a product and how to sell it as a product. I think that the way and the moment that we're living right now in society, we're bringing one of the biggest change, generational change and technological change, because of automation. The moment that we are living in right now is the turning point of creativity. The moment that we live right now is one of the few moments in time that we artists have to create a product that can be sold to the education as a tool of improvement for the future. One of the biggest fears of society right now is automation. It's AI. It's the amount of jobs that are going to be lost. It's the amount of not meaningless, but repetitive tasks that are going to be obsolete. And the only way, and this is one of the biggest issue on high-end industries also, and high tech, from high tech to lower tech. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs that are going to become obsolete. And the only way that these can be solved is by creativity. Because automation will never reach a point of superiority over the human creativity, not yet, and will probably not be alive to the moment that that will happen. So the simple fact of being able to sell not art in school and education, I personally think that that's a mistake, because art is not to be taught. Art is to be experienced. Art is to be influenced by a process of creation, it's an insight process. What we can teach, what we can show, what we can walk with someone is the path of creativity, is the path of problem solving, is the path of ideas. It's to hold the bag when they bounce back from a wall and just a little bit towards the right, run, now, go, fall again. And just to lift them again. And that's the product. I think that's the upsell quote that can be achieved, not art.
Yeah.
Because art is a lost battle. If we keep running and running towards art, we will never achieve anything. It's not something that we can sell. It's not something that we can achieve. It's already pugnant. It's already rotten for society. Artists in any age, in any era, if we go to the 70s, the hippies, if we go to now, is the pariahs. If any era that we can see artists, art, or extremely successful beings or nothing, there's no branch, there's no range of them. But if we go for creativity, creativity it's such a powerful word, and it's such a power upseller that every startup, every fintech at any level of society right now, you're seeing creativity. And right now, in this moment in time, is the most valuable skill that you can find. And if you can read it at any point of education, at any point of hiring, at any process of the actual society, the most value research or the most value point that everyone is looking for is to find this break, this rule, or this human, or this person that can break the box. And that's what can be upsell in education.
I didn't think it was possible, but I think you got right to the heart of the matter. And I think you are exactly right that art should not be the selling feature.
Rebrand.
Creativity is, because that is the thread that runs through everything, right? Whether you're working in, like you said, the highest, the leading edge of high tech, to the person doing a job on an assembly line who thinks of a better way to do it and does himself out of a job. I don't know if you know Kurt Vonnegut's novel Player Piano. It's exactly about that exact subject. The one of the characters in the book is a hairdresser, and he is terrified throughout the whole book that somebody's going to invent a robot that can do his job. And he has nightmares about this, to the point where he's the one who invents the robot in his nightmares that does all the other, including himself, all the other hairdressers out of a job. But you're right, it is creativity. In my weaving practice, which is based on a Japanese philosophy, one of the questions that's asked is, what's the difference between something that's made by a human being and something that's made by a machine? And in that quest for perfection, what we're really trying to achieve is repetition of exactly the same thing over and over and over again, which is something that machines do well, but humans don't. So we should be celebrating what we do well as human beings, which is make something different. Those iterations make something different each time. So, jazz music, which is sort of improvised rather than something that's carved in stone, right? So creativity, I think you really did hit it. I don't know if somebody's making notes of what we should be selling to the MLAs. That's it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're recording, and then Grant is keeping notes as well.
Yeah.
But Winnie,
That was very eloquent. Thank you. That was really
yeah, that's great.
So Jesus is going to be our next MLA. I think he just arrived here.
Remember Winnie at the beginning, she talked about the practice of creativity.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the perfect way to kind of talk about it. That it's, and I think when you say art, it's like this roadblock.
Yeah.
It's like a stop sign.
It's a rebranding issue here. We can still have the same goal in mind of getting the world to be creative and to embrace creativity. But as soon as we call it art, then it's like that. So we can kind of subvert the roadblocks.
I think that we took it personally. That was the problem. We took
Yes.
we took art out of the schools, and the fact that people were demonifying art, we took it personally. And the moment that we did, we lost. The moment that we went against trying to prove something, we lost. Because our own goal is to create, or our own goal is to solve a problem from a different way. And what we have been doing for ages, it's the contrary. We have been seeing an enemy outside. We have been seeing an enemy in the government. We have been seeing an enemy everywhere else. But I think we never thought that we were our own enemy. I think that our mentality, because of the love that we have for what we do, the passion, I think that was is the biggest problem, is that we're so passionate about art, about sharing, about caring, about showing. Because at the end, art it moves us to grab attention, have attention. We cannot say that we have it or not. That it's just we lost a part of our soul when we couldn't capitalize the fact that art is not necessary in education. And that's true. It sounds awful, but that's true, because art is not about success and education is about success. The current state of current education is not if it's right or it's wrong, but art doesn't have a space in the current capital world and the way that money is moving. Creativity, though, it has the biggest space. it solved the solution of the puzzle of success of all the money. And we are not using it.
So earlier when Ariel mentioned, again, I go back to her quote where she said, art isn't about drawing, insert any, visual or creative traditional art form in an art class. So art isn't about drawing, drama, sculpture, all those things. It's about ideas. And about, now I'm going to extend her quote or edit it to say it's about ideas and creativity. So maybe I'll go back in one of the first questions I asked the group like an hour or more ago. So we know that art education by art specialists got de-emphasized. Has creativity been taken away as well? Like, has everything actually been fine the whole time? It's just that people aren't, as masterful with their art supplies. I know it sounds like a very crude way to put it, but as maybe we haven't lost, but we've lost the point. Like we've lost the plot a little bit as artists, thinking, oh, this is awful. But how much of what we really believe in actually still is there?
Well, I have a thought.
Good, Tam.
I have many thoughts.
I know.
What I noticed when I was in art school was that technique and being creative was not as high a priority in post-secondary education in the fine arts as being able to talk about the arts. I often say that I got my degree in being able to bullshit about what I've made and being able to use big words to talk about the art, but actively getting my ideas or creating my ideas or growing my ideas and getting them down the way I wanted. And even the process of iterations and failing and getting back up was not emphasized in art school. And I think that needs to start in elementary school all the way up for that to be perfectly or more fully realized, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have I was just looking into becoming a school teacher to do the PDP, art teacher. And the only way you can do it is really through the secondary, I guess, because there's no art teachers in elementary school. So it's like this kind of puzzle. And then I was doing it through SFU, but I also looked at UBC. I didn't end up putting in my application because they're really specific about they want painting, drawing, sculpture, and photography, video, all like newer mediums, let's say, are much lower on the echelon. So like my background is much more in, photography and I don't want to say graphic design, but, new media, maybe let's say, or multimedia. And that isn't valued, at that level. So you're always gonna, not saying that there's anything the matter with the traditional arts, but it's interesting just to, the system is so kind of
closed. Yeah, but that takes us back to what Jesus was talking about, of how we are our own enemies in a way. And I'm not saying us, the ones that were here, but art, the way that art, as he also mentioned, like in every era, it's as Tammy said, like there is elitism behind it, right? There's always been this, and artists created that. It's not that, like, artists wanted that elitism and they wanted to be this, we are considered this A thing, to be able to sell that art in a maybe more expensive way.
Yeah, maybe capitalism, maybe Eurocentric society and neoliberal capitalism.
I think artists have to play a role in like, even now, I think that there's a lot of gatekeepers on the arts, and like to be able to break into any of these networks of certain kind of art. And I think I discussed this with Ariel. Like, for example, as an immigrant, it's really hard to come to a new country and to break into, no matter how much education you have about the arts, how much, you know, recognition you have in your own country. You don't have any here. You're not part of this group. You're not part of this, you know, elite group that we are the ones that tell what is art and what is not art, you know. So we have contributed as well to this kind of now this art kind of that now is like a demo, like is demonized, right? Like as Jesus mentions, right? Because it's something that, because not everybody can understand it, and we wanted in a way to make it look like it's not, like it's something that is not understandable for everyone, right? And now we are like, hey, wait a minute, like, it's not like that. And I'm not saying us, but like us, I think from the very get-go, we know what we wanted to do, but it's switching now that idea. Then what Jesus is I guess promoting here is to drop the word art, you know, like just drop it out, because it's so, you know, it has so much, it's so loaded now that just drop it, do what you're doing, because anyway what you're doing is the philosophy behind it, is the right thing to do, but just call it creativity and just drop the word art, you know, kind of thing, you know.
I think that's what in AIRS, that's what happens. The teachers are like, oh, this is art, you know. They never really perceived art like as being this kind of messy thing that was more about ideas than about, oh, look at the pretty thing we're going to stick on the wall.
Yeah.
About the money and how much it's making. Just I was trying to find this year. I couldn't find this year. Just the motion picture industry here in Vancouver is doing 3.4 billion per year.
Wow.
So we have 6,000 different, 6,000 different artists, more than 200 hubs, from small to big. There are 4 big hubs in the world at the moment. London is one of the biggest. Montreal is growing a lot. We have Vancouver, New York, but it's going down. LA, so Hollywood, is gone.
It's gone?
That's something that almost no one knows. And no one knows who's the next Hollywood is. It's Vancouver, because it's on the same time zone. So the tax break that we get here, like the VFX industry, the motion picture industry, it's so big, or it was so big, it's being cut a bit because Montreal is competing. And Montreal is giving them a tax break that is even bigger than that. We're talking about millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to create these jobs. So there's a lot of money involved in high tech for art. It is huge. The amount of money is huge for it. And more than 80% of the artists that work on this industry are over average income. So it's high skill, high tech, that there's no resources. There's nothing. The industry is growing so much that there are no artists.
Oh, yeah, which would make sense.
That's one of the reasons why I'm here. I'm from Costa Rica. I got imported into London, and one company from here that I cannot mention the exact name, I can mention the modern name, but not the exact name, competed to bring me here. So that's why I came here, because there's no talent. And even though there are several schools that teach it, they're not enough. So the amount of money that is coming to and from media and new media, it's so big that it's not giving time to education to cope up with it. So education moves way slower than society. We know that by fact.
Yeah.
And this year, through everything, 10 years to the future, it took education online, that it will have happened in 20 years, 10 years in developed countries, on underdeveloped countries like mine, probably 30 years. So, but it took them all over the world at the same time. And something that you can see, and everyone that has been teaching or has taught at some point, is the single fact of teaching is creativity. Every day is I have to come up with a new way to get interested in these students and to make them interested and to make them feel, think, or do something. And I think that's the same thing that we need to do now. There's money. There's a lot of money. It's like huge piles of money around. And there's really, really big companies. And following with the value of art that there was mentioned before, I think it wasn't the artist that really made art valuable. The Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo was a slave, so he couldn't go out. He was a slave of the Pope till he finished it.
Yeah.
But the value of that is huge. And art traders, art is so immaterial, has no value. But then you can sell it for billions of dollars, hundreds of millions. You can wipe capitals right away via art. So you can pay an artist $20,000 to make a piece and then sell it by $1 million. And the one that buys, where's that money come from? So someone bought something, sell something, and then it's millions from art. So I think that the artists, they weren't the culprit of the value of art. The laws and the capitalism brought us where we are right now. But we have the option to use that in our favor. Because right now, COVID is breaking everything. Now everything is media. Now everything is sound. Now everything is images. Now everyone, every teacher, every work, everyone has to come in a way to show something. And that's exactly what we are experts at. I think it's the best opportunity.
Yeah. But you see, and to become a teacher, they still go back to the, it's so lumber and slow that they only see what was, 50 years ago.
But at the same time, now, today, if you think of education, how are they learning? What's
online? Most kids are.
Yeah, what's the difference then now? Today, if you put a school and someone from its home, what's the difference? Everyone now learns from YouTube. The math teachers are doing amazing jobs, even better than most teachers from YouTube. So the content now, it's from the same input. It's not a school. You cannot differentiate now who has a title and who doesn't. Who is a valid teacher and who's not. Because a title doesn't make a teacher. There are a lot of different things that can make education worthy. But now, there's a lot of schools, there's specialized things. Everyone can learn almost everything by the internet. Mm-hmm. And it never was so close to education, which for teachers is a disaster. But at the same time, it's an opportunity to break. And it was forced, yes, it was forced, but there's a maximum opportunity to change how things behave because everyone had proof of something.
All right.
Jesus, I'm so glad you joined our
thank you, Jesus.
our session tonight.
Yeah. How did you find us?
My girlfriend.
Oh.
Thank her for us.
Thank her.
It was my girlfriend that found the panel. So I was like, yeah, let's go. Let's do something.
Okay.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, that's.
We hope to hear more from you and to meet you someday.
Yes.
I wish to.
Yes. All right. Well, are we ready to take a leave, everyone? Thank you so much.
It's time to go. Good night.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been fantastic. Thanks, everybody.
It's been really fantastic.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Nice to meet you, Jesus.
Nice to meet you all.
Okay, bye. Bye. Bye, Aggie. Thank you. Bye, Tammy.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Rebecca. See you soon. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to shut her down.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Bye, Grant.
Junwen?
Yes.
Just got to say, got to give you two of these.
All
Thank you,
right.
thank you, Tammy, as well.
I was like, oh my God, all these t-shirts we can print with all these quotes.
I've been writing like crazy. I've
I know
been
you were writing all that.
screenshotting and copying.
I'm like, I'm sure Grant is going, oh my God.
Yep.
That was awesome. Anyway, thank you, Grant.
Thank you too, my friend. We'll let's go. Let's wrap it up and say goodnight and
See you tomorrow.
and sleep
anyway.
on it. Yeah, we'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Good night.
Bye.